Welcome to the Business Results Program. This is how to transform yourself, your team, and your company to perform better and achieve higher results. Let's get started. I'm so happy you're here. My name is Pete Winarski, and I'm the CEO of Win Enterprises, LLC. Check out CompleteBusinessTransformation.com and look at the latest posts and resources we put there to serve you. I started this program because I want you to know that it doesn't have to be that hard. Business leaders like you struggle to get results, to build your team, to satisfy customers, to grow your businesses, and to stay sane in the middle of these crazy dynamics going on around you. My team and I have had full careers in business leadership roles, and we get it. We've had the same challenges as you, and we can share what we've learned, and we can make your life easier. In this program, I will be joined by various members of our team and other guests that I know can help you. We will offer new perspectives and share some of the secrets that you're just not hearing about anywhere else. The Business Results Program is your personal journey to improve yourself as you improve your company and achieve your most important goals and deliver the business results that make you and your team happy. Now, let's get to today's episode. Today's guest on Business Results Radio is Colin Cooper. At the time of this podcast recording, Colin was just finishing up his commitment to serve as Connecticut's first ever Chief Manufacturing Officer so that he can enjoy a well-deserved retirement. Colin is the former CEO of the Whitcraft Group. He started his career as a design engineer for Pratt and Whitney and has experience in turnaround consulting and investment banking. The Whitcraft story is a special one as some of Whitcraft's teachers in TPS are the same that I learned under when I was at Wiremold and include Mr. Nakao from Shingijutsu. Whitcraft is a contract manufacturer of precision machined, formed, and fabricated parts and assemblies for aerospace OEMs. In his 20 years as Whitcraft CEO, Colin grew that company from one facility in Eastford, Connecticut to 11 facilities in New England and in 5 other states, and grew revenues from $20 million to $250 million. That's an exceptional compound annual growth rate of 13.5%. In today's interview, we get into the biggest challenges manufacturers face today. Even though Colin represents Connecticut, these challenges are not unique and definitely apply in your geography too. Listen in to our conversation, take notes, and be ready to apply what you learn. Hi everyone, Pete Winarski here. This is Business Results Radio, and I'm here today with Colin Cooper. Colin is the state of Connecticut's very first Chief Manufacturing Officer. Brief couple words about Colin. He's got a really deep background. He was, did turnarounds for a big part of his career. Was the CEO of a business here in Connecticut called Whitcraft, grew Whitcraft from 1 or 2 locations up to multiple presence across not only the state of Connecticut, but multiple states in New England and Illinois, and just an all-around smart operating, business leader who loves manufacturing and is in that special position to talk a little bit of a government slant as well as what can we do as businesses. So Colin, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. And I always look forward to the opportunity to talk about manufacturing in Connecticut. Yeah,
you bet. And I know it's, we were just, sort of the warm up before we turned on the record button. We were like, okay, this could easily go for hours and hours if we let your passion take over. But, this will be great. This is a great conversation. Think of, the idea, not just for manufacturers, some of, if you're sitting here at the beginning of this intro listening and say, hang on, I'm not a manufacturing company, I'm a service company. Don't go away because everything we're going to talk about really does still apply because it's business survival. And what do we do in this unique time of our
history. You know, we're recording this right at the end of 2021. We're talking about what's coming in 2022. And, you know, it's an important conversation. So, you know, Colin, thank you for being here. You're really going to add a lot of value today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, let's start with COVID because it's obvious, right? COVID, you know, was the big pause in everyone's businesses over the last couple of years. And, you know, there's a lot of companies that are still climbing back to try and get to their pre-COVID levels or trying to get cash flow. And, you know, many of them had things like the PPP, the payroll protection plan, and they had some relief from, you know, some of the SBA disaster loans like the EIDL. And yet they're still struggling. Like they're not back to the revenue levels yet. You know, and bank, you know, trying to get financing for some of them is pretty tough. You know, the underwriters are tougher, have tougher criteria. They don't want to lend money as freely as they used to. Give us some ideas. Like, what are you seeing out there for how someone can get cash flow, get some of their financing up while they're still climbing back from COVID?
Yeah, good question. I haven't, you know, I'm constantly talking to manufacturers every day and soliciting sort of what their headwind issues are and how they're doing, whatnot. I would tell you that access to capital is not right now at the top of the list of things, and we'll get into some of what some of those things are, I know, later. It's an unusual lending market. There's a lot of capital out there looking for a home, and so if you're a good credit right now, meaning, you know, if you've got if you don't need the money, everybody wants to give it to you, and if you're a tougher credit, it's been challenging. Now you're right. There have been, you know, we've had the PPP and the EIDL program from the SBA. The state of Connecticut did a small emergency bridge loan program right back at not just for manufacturers, but for all small Connecticut businesses. But now people are trying to access the sort of more traditional financing channels. And the challenges for companies that have had some revenue and bottom line challenges is that banks tend to look backwards at your historical performance. They look at your historical cash flow coverages, and it's really it's the future cash flows that's going to service that debt and pay it back. And the banks are smart enough to know this, but they are also regulated, and so a lot of the regulations, they need to hit certain ratios, and their lenders need to hit certain ratios. And those are generally generated off of trailing performance. In addition, you had, when the pandemic hit, the regulators came in and were particularly focused on areas like transportation, aerospace, hospitality, and they basically told banks, hold up, you know, let's not put new loans on the books in these areas till things start to sort out. So I know, talking with some of the banks, that they saw some companies that they felt were bankable credits that they would like to extend some credit to, but they just really weren't able to because of the regulation that was in place. So sort of bumping up against cap limits. Those cap limits have since subsided. I think at sort of towards the end of the summer, the regulators backed off of that. So I think some of those lenders are back into those sectors now, and capital starting to flow a little bit more freely there. But again, I can tell you, if you're a good credit, there's really probably been few times that have been better to be looking for money, because there's a lot of money looking for a home and it's cheap. If you're challenged credit, you know, you've got to have a good story, and you've got to find a lender, probably maybe not the big money center banks who have maybe a bit more cookie cutter. You know, talk with your local people. You know, we're fortunate in Connecticut that we have a lot of banks that are very familiar with manufacturing and very supportive of manufacturing. And if you get in with the right group and you've got a good story to tell, they'll work to try to help get you the capital that you need to to shore up your business, and then hopefully continue on your growth trajectory that most manufacturers were seeing pre-pandemic. I would say, obviously the SBA's got some great programs, and a lot of our banks in Connecticut lend through the SBA program. I've talked with a lot of small mid-sized manufacturers and pointed them in the direction of the Connecticut Small Business Development Group, run by a fellow by the name of Joe Ercolano. And they're great working with companies to understand their business and then help them understand what their opportunities are, and sort of point them in the right direction on people who may be able to help them out on cash flow lending. And then we've got, for early stage companies, we've got Connecticut Innovations, but that's not sort of what most traditional manufacturers are looking for at this point. But there are options out there.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You're so right. If you have excellent credit, everyone in the world wants to give you money right now, because there's, the private equity phrase, there's a lot of dry powder out there looking for a home. And so it's the people in between who have still some challenges to work through.
Yeah, and just to complete that thought, the challenges, my experience has been the challenges actually happen during the rebound, right? On the way down, as you know, you've got a lot of working capital tied up in your business. You've got raw material on the shelf. You got WIP in the pipeline, and you sort of work that down as demand goes down, and you generate cash flow off of your existing inventory. It's when the markets come back like they have now, then your expenses front run your revenues, right? You need to buy that raw material. You need to put labor and value into that. It's in WIP. Then it goes into finished goods, and then you ship it, and it turns into receivables. There's a long time before that turns into cash. Mm-hmm. And so, a lot of companies, a lot of small manufacturers, and manufacturing is a very capital intensive industry. They struggle on the rebound, which is sort of counterintuitive.
Yeah, but the way you just described it, Colin, it makes perfect sense. And companies have, as you said, they drain their inventories down. They may have had excellent cash management philosophies and how their CFO guided them, and they've probably drained down their allocations that they had, the safety nets that they had in place. So you're right that as orders start coming in, and the cash cycle is sometimes longer than it takes to actually, they have purchase orders to fill, but they can't pay their suppliers, right? So it's a little bit of a vicious cycle to break out of in the near coming months.
Yeah, and I haven't heard a hue and cry from the manufacturers I've been talking to. So I think most are in a decent shape. We've got some sectors, look, the pandemic was wrenching for all businesses, particularly in manufacturing. A lot of them, even though their aggregate demand may have stayed level, what you had is wild swings inside their product portfolio, where certain products went way up and other ones dropped off the map, which is challenging in and of itself. But I would say, financially, most manufacturers that I've spoken with have weathered it pretty well. There are certain sectors like aerospace that really took it on the chin. But even there, I think people are more focused right now on the opportunities ahead rather than the risk. I mean, we spent a year and a half where everybody was just focused on the risk that was 6 inches in front of them. Mm-hmm. And now people are looking out 6, 12, 18 months at the opportunities.
Right. Well, excellent. Let's shift to another issue that's kind of really in a lot of people's faces right now, especially those companies that have had supply chains that are beyond their local geography. And, I think back, over the last few decades, there's a lot of the clients I've had, I was at Danaher, there was, sort of the corporate guidance to offshore a lot of our supply base, or even some of our easier assembly operations. When I was at McKinsey, there was the drive. A lot of businesses were finding, ways to reduce their cost structure by, sending production over to Asia, for example. Mm-hmm. And now, of course, if you do have a significant chunk of your supply base in a faraway land, it's not getting here on time. And so, here we are. And this conversation's happening right at the front end of the Christmas season, and everybody's worried about, will I get my gifts on time? So let's say you're the manufacturer. What are some things that you can do given that there are some supply chain challenges? We've got a global supply chain, global economy, and even though we're producing manufacturing here in Connecticut, we're impacted by things that are rippling on the other side of the globe.
Yeah. So there has been, that you're familiar with the term, obviously, with reshoring or onshoring, and this is something that's been going on for a period of time now. I mean, you can go back and you can't ascribe a specific date to it, but really for the last 5 years, I would say we've had sort of increasing momentum in this direction, and that's a function of that labor costs are rising more quickly in developing countries. You've got a lot of technology that's being employed in the U.S. Connecticut manufacturers just are lowering so the cost gap that those suppliers in developing markets is being closed at this point. You have, I think, consumers or purchasers of the products started to understand some of the challenges of long supply lines. Difficulty in reacting to market changes because you're putting your orders in and you're locked in 9 months ahead if you're making it across the world, and you end up carrying more inventory and higher capital levels because you've got stuff in the pipeline coming from across the world, and frequently you're buying it before it even gets loaded on the ship through an LC draw, letter of credit draw, and then also, companies, this increased focus on protection of IP and companies understanding the risk of their to their IP of a product that's made across the world. So I think those are some long-term trends that have been in effect that have been sort of driving this move towards reshoring. But then, of course, you have more recently, pre-pandemic, you had the advent of some significant tariffs coming online, and that caused a lot of skewing of the economics of offshore international sourcing. And then, of course, COVID hit, and then it was just bedlam, particularly when you were in things like personal protective equipment and medical equipment, and it was literally the wild, wild west. I mean, we were involved at the state level trying to procure some of this stuff. Unless you had people on the ground at the facility in some remote province of China, you had no assurance you were going to get it because somebody was going to scoop it up along the way. And then now, we've come through the pandemic, we still have, real issues on logistics, right? Both from a time perspective on stuff, taking a lot longer to get over here, being held up at ports and whatnot, and then a cost perspective where, I'm not a student of shipping costs, but my understanding of the data I've seen is that your shipping a container over today could cost 5 times what it did, 6-9 months ago. So this is just sort of the acceleration of some trends that have been in effect for 5 years, and net, it's good for our manufacturers. You've got a lot of end users of these products who are saying, look, we've got to start manufacturing the products in the same markets where we sell them. We can't have these long supply chains, and so net, I think that's good for us in the U.S., good for our Connecticut suppliers, but it doesn't help you in the short term. And so what you've got is you've got companies really putting more resources into identifying sort of local sources of supply, and I'm sure we'll talk at some point about access to skilled labor, but it's similar. It's a very tight market, and companies are putting more resources behind identifying the opportunities to source closer to home. And again, this is just an accelerating a trend that's been in effect for years now.
Yeah, and even though we're here talking about Connecticut, this could be the same conversation if we were sitting together in the Chicago area or anywhere else. It's the local geography that we're really talking about, and I think what you're defining is something that will jolt the economy and jolt it if there are those local businesses that haven't felt they could compete because it was the larger world economy and all of the orders were going overseas. Now they have an argument and they could start competing on short lead time or competing maybe on different payment terms and things that matter a whole lot to the small local manufacturer. Not even small, some are quite large. Colin, one of the things that's interesting, I think back to my days at Wiremold and putting together the a really excellent pull system based supply base with this is Art Byrne led philosophies and the strategies here with the milk run truck that would go and every single day be able to do some pickups from local suppliers, and then having suppliers close enough where the Kanban cards that represented consumed product off the shelf here inside of the building would then get scanned over and turn into anything placed by, say, 3 o'clock this afternoon would show up on the dock by 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. And so there's a total cost picture. The purchase price is one variable.
Right. You're exactly right.
Yeah, there's the inventory holding and just the turning of the system. There was the trend that I saw some excellent lean systems start to err in the way of let's go for the purchase price variance. Let's get the PPV. Let's send it overseas. Let's get the cost structure down. But what they introduced is really what you just described in all of the transportation and inventory holding. And now the pendulum's coming back the other way.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to measure the purchase price of a component, right? But all these other costs are tougher to track and layer into the procurement costs of those goods. But companies are doing that now. So they're more aware of the true costs, including things like inventory holding costs. But also those accounting systems don't properly account for risk, right? And risk isn't a problem until it happens. And we're seeing that right now. So I think this is going to accelerate the trend. Again, it's an evolution. It's not a revolution. It's not like people are going to snap their fingers and everything's going to be sourced. I mean, we just don't have the capacity right now or the capability to make a lot of things that are made offshore. But I think we're going to continue to see that trend. We'll see it strengthen, and I think that's a good thing. But in the near term, and they say in the long run, we're all dead. We got to get through the short term here, and companies are really scrambling. And so part of what we're doing is when we talk with companies that are having a problem, we're trying to identify other local, just like we did in the pandemic, right? We looked at companies that had capabilities and capacities and said, can you pivot? And some of these, the good thing about a lot of our manufacturers, they're small, but they're nimble and they're good at what they do. And we're trying to, and they're out there trying to identify those opportunities too, where they can use their capacities and their capabilities to pivot to make some of these critically needed items that are sort of bollocksing up our supply chains right now.
Yes, for sure. So you hinted at a potential speed bump towards that aim of someone saying, okay, I'm gonna go local and I'm going to supply local businesses, and that's the labor market. And I'm a big fan of Inc. magazine, and I got my morning Inc. magazine email, and I flip through, and so many articles right now, not just Inc., but they're talking about the great resignation. People are leaving their companies, their labor shortages. They think, well, I ought to be able to fill my open spots and I can't do it. Right. So, knowing that that's an issue and for whatever the personal drivers are that are making people decide, I don't want to go get the job or move my career forward right now. How should a company who needs people, what should they do today that might be different from what they would have done, say, 2 years ago?
Okay, good question. So before I answer that, let me just try to frame that with you, just sort of quantify it for you a little bit. when I started with the state just over 2 years ago and canvassed the manufacturing ecosystem to try to find out what the headwind issues were, the top of the list was, I used to joke priorities 1, 2, and 3, and this is back in January of 2020, pre-pandemic. Top 3 issues were workforce. Pandemic comes along, and if you'd asked me in April or May of last year whether workforce was going to be at the top of the issues today, I would have said, no way. It's a bloodbath out there. And yet here we are. And as measured by the state, the number of open manufacturing by the State Department of Labor, the number of open manufacturing positions today is 40% above where it was pre-pandemic. So this is really an issue. And anecdotally, and I talked to scores of companies, my rule of thumb is the number of open positions are roughly 10% of what an employee's headcount is. So if they've got 30 people, they've got 3 or 4 open positions. If they've got 500 people, they've got 50 open positions, and that's held pretty tightly. So if you extrapolate that across the Connecticut manufacturing landscape, there are somewhere between 10 and 15,000 open positions today. I feel very confident the numbers in that neighborhood. So it is it's an acute issue. So I think the first thing that companies need to do and are doing is you got to retain the people you have, right? I mean, because for everyone you lose, you got to go out and fill another hole. And it's expensive to fill the hole. You don't know what you're going to get. And so I think companies really focused on, understanding what the needs and desires of their incumbent workforce is, and trying to meet that. And so what you're seeing is a level of sort of flexibility in a lot of areas that employers are offering now that historically they may not have offered, in terms of hours, location. Obviously, manufacturing has got to be done on premise for the most part, but allowing people who are not directly involved in making product to have some flexibility, and then flexibility on benefits and whatnot, but also more clearly defining the path for advancement. I think a lot of frustration for people is what do I need to do to continue advance. So make sure that they clearly identify opportunities for people to advance, mark those paths, and then give them the resources to pursue those opportunities. I'm not seeing as much of a focus on training right now as I'd like to, and candidly, it's sort of the old adage: I'm too busy to sharpen my saw. I mean, people can't afford to take people out to train them because they need them to get the product made and out the door to their customers. But it's something that they're aware of. So first and foremost, focus on your incumbent workforce and make sure you're doing what you need to do to make sure they're engaged and you retain them. And then secondly, in terms of recruitment, the days of sort of running an ad and then, expecting a parade of people meeting those qualifications to walk through the front door are well past. And manufacturing business leaders know that. And, as you and I have talked before, I joke that it's recruiting, workforce development is not a spectator game. It's a participant game. You have to, put on your uniform and wade into the game. And so when I'm talking with business leaders, I really recommend that they engage with what I call the talent training infrastructure. Go out there, make those relationships with your technical high school that's nearby. Make the relationships with the advanced manufacturing center in your region. We've got 10 of them around the state. No, you can't be in Connecticut and be more than 20 miles away from an advanced manufacturing center affiliated with one of our community colleges. So get out there, meet the executive directors, get to know them, get to know the instructors, get engaged. I was talking to one business leader and she's actually working her way into the curriculum in one of the programs, so that the students coming through the program, part of it is they have to come and visit her shop, which I just thought was brilliant. And so you've got to go upstream to identify that talent and get it, essentially develop those relationships early. Because if you wait for somebody to come through some of these training programs, by the time they hit the street, somebody else has gone upstream again. So, and then also, as you and I talked about, companies now are sort of dividing HR. They're adding resources in HR, and they have sort of the more traditional HR roles of, that's your biggest asset, your human resources, focus on the thing an HR manager does, but then putting specific resources in place around recruitment, and just putting more resources in there to focus on that area. But ultimately, we, the state, need to work to increase the supply of skilled labor, because a lot of what's going on at a company level, some of it's a zero-sum game, right? They're taken from somebody else. At a state level, we need to increase the size of the pool, and there's a tremendous amount of activity that's going on in and around that. A lot of that led by the Office of Workforce Strategy, which is now led by a woman by the name of Dr. Kelly Valeries. And, we've got a strategic plan that was developed and has been released. That group has been staffed and given financial resources to execute the plan. And ultimately, we're working to increase the size of the pool. Again, part of it is, a lot of it is, as what you said, is the reason why the situation has gotten worse is because we've had people drop out, the Great Resignation. Now, some of that is permanent, right? I mean, you've been in manufacturing. Every manufacturing facility you go into, they've got a 70-year-old tool maker or
right.
several of them. And a lot of those people during the pandemic just decided they didn't want to take the risk of working in a congregate work environment because they had health risk factors, or somebody in their family did, or their household. So they retired. And I think a lot of those folks will stay retired. I think some of the younger folks who have pulled out of the workforce, you're going to see them coming back in, not as fast as all of us would like, but you'll see some coming back in. But in manufacturing, we're really focused on getting new entrants into the manufacturing workforce. And there's a lot of we could spend 2 days going through that, and we don't have time for that, but a lot of activity going on there, and it just can't happen fast enough.
Yeah, I just was on a walk through a facility here locally, and met a worker who's 43 years, Colin, 43 years in this particular company, and he was talking about, I'm on my way out. I'm planning the retirement for early next year. How do you replace 43 years, right? I mean, that's, everything that you could possibly know about, the technical aspects of the job that guy had. So, that product he was making, and just everything. And
well, that speaks to the importance of standard work, right? I mean,
for sure.
Unfortunately, again, our manufacturing census of manufacturing companies are, where we say it's a mile wide and an inch deep. We've got 4,000, relatively a lot of small companies there. And unfortunately, in a lot of those companies, there's a lot of tribal knowledge. And it's incumbent on those business leaders to sort of document that knowledge and drive it into standard work. Because if there's one person in the whole company who knows that, you got to set this to this, and then tilt this way, and then, turn backwards clockwise 2 different ways, and before you can make this, then you're in trouble when that person walks out the door. And every manufacturing company has some of that. And again, work towards documenting standard work. And then also what we would do is we would frequently take those highly experienced senior career people who are planning to retire, and the last year transition them into a training position. And that doesn't always work. Some people don't have an interest in that, but by and large, frequently people welcome that opportunity because they want to pass that knowledge along. Now, you lose something because that person's so good at what they're doing they're not making the product that you need to satisfy the customer. But we used to joke that we would try to download everything that was between their ears, in the last year that they were there, and make sure that we had it, recorded somehow, and so that we could save it and utilize it in the future.
Yeah, so important. And for those who aren't thinking ahead, as you pointed out, not creating standard work, not documenting processes, not tapping into their knowledge. There's a big surprise the day after they're gone, right? It's like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
What do we do now?
Yeah.
Right. So I don't want to dwell on the idea of government support, but you are in a government role. So I feel at least compelled to ask you, here's the state of Connecticut. What is Connecticut doing to make it easier for manufacturing companies?
Well, I think we've got a bunch of new programs that I'll talk about in a minute. I think legislatively, there were a couple of what I'll call wins in this last session. There are changes that have been made and continuing changes that will be made to the Connecticut Transfer Act that sort of governs all businesses, but it's particularly onerous for manufacturing businesses for environmental regulation. And so there are modifications that have been made and additional ones that will be made. So we transition from a transfer-based environmental regulatory environment to a release base, so that if there is a release, it's got to be reported, then remediation starts. So it gets us more in line with what 48 of the other 50 states are doing. Mm-hmm. And I think this has been a pain point for manufacturers for more than a generation now. We're still also very cognizant that we need to protect the environment, but I think it's being approached now in a manner that's going to ensure protecting the environment, but also reduce some of the burden on our manufacturers. And then also there was some reforms made to the Connecticut Unemployment Insurance Program that, based on the analysis that I've seen, should benefit between 70 and 80% of our small, mid-sized manufacturers. And it really shifts the burden of that program more to the people who are driving the cost of that program. And that's been a big a pain point for our manufacturers. There have been some discussions in and around targeted tax relief. And I think there's probably more receptiveness to that. And I'm not talking about wholesale changes, but I'm talking about in certain areas. We're pushing for some relief on for pass-through entities on the Connecticut the R&D tax credit for pass-through entities. Like to see that come through, and the manufacturing apprenticeship tax credit. Right now, most of our small, mid-sized manufacturers are pass-through entities, S corporations, LLC, and they can't avail themselves of that. We'd like to see that be available to them. And then, again, they're really early stages. Some other areas, some discussions of tax relief. I can't say whether it's going to go through, but I think the fact that there are productive discussions going on, or any discussions at all, serious discussions going on about these topics, is a good indicator, something we haven't seen for a while. And then last year, coming into 2021, one of my top priorities was to get additional funding for the Manufacturing Innovation Fund. It's a fund that was initiated in 2014. And we had sort of run through the available funding on that. And so a lot of our programs were slowing down, and some of them were actually stopped for lack of funding. So we got the support of the executive branch and the legislative branch, and got $20 million allocated to the Manufacturing Innovation Fund, $10 million for this fiscal year and $10 million for next fiscal year, which allows us to continue to support legacy programs like the Incumbent Worker Training Program, which has been so valuable to our manufacturing companies. We've trained well over 20,000 Connecticut employees in manufacturing. Our apprenticeship program, manufacturing apprenticeship program, and our manufacturing voucher program, which is matching grants that companies frequently use for things like capital expenditure needs. So we're able to continue to support those. And then just last month, we announced 6 new initiatives in and around that. One focused on engineering interns. We want to give companies incentive to bring engineering students in earlier, develop those relationships. We train a lot of engineers in the state of Connecticut. We want to retain them in the state of Connecticut. We want them working for our manufacturing businesses. We're going to be engaging an entity that is focused on matching our innovators with our manufacturers. As we say, if it's invented here, we want to make it here. And heretofore, we haven't had that capability to match them well. We're putting in a program around grants to help underwrite the cost of cybersecurity audits and roadmaps to maturity, as well as analysis of companies where they are in sort of adopting digital technology, and then help them also give them a roadmap on where they, for their specific business, where they may be best served making their investments in Industry 4.0 technology to get the best return on investment from that. And then we're working on with the Department of Administrative Services on a new website, which sort of turns things on its head. So the goal is to have manufacturers, if they have an issue, to go to the website, put their issue or their solution that they're looking for, and be connected to the solution providers. We've got a lot of people out there providing services to our manufacturing communities, but those programs, even though some of them are excellent, they don't do any good if people don't know about them, and that's our biggest issue. So we want to bring that to people's fingertips. And then one of the things I'm really excited about is we're going to be undertaking an advertising campaign. I call it the Hearts and Minds campaign, to really, drive demand, make sure our young people understand the career opportunities in manufacturing, that it's not just a good job, but it's a great career opportunities, drive demand into all of these great programs we have around the state at our advanced manufacturing centers, make sure they access that training, get trained into the workforce. But we're also going to aim it not just at them, we're going to aim it at the educators, the administrators, and the parents, who frequently are sort of a point of resistance. I think a lot of parents aren't aware of what a great career opportunity young people have in manufacturing. Also, there's this perception that your educational career ends as soon as your professional career in manufacturing starts. And as you know, nothing could be further from the truth. So we want people to know that these are not mutually exclusive decisions. So we've got a bunch of new programs coming to life that'll be coming to life in 2022. And we're really excited about that, and really excited at the level of coordination, collaboration that's going on in and around the manufacturing community. So lot to look forward to.
Colin, that was an exhaustive list. I mean, you really touched on not just some of the things that are historically in place, and I love hearing that the Innovation Fund has money again, and that's going to continue. And I'm really excited about the last part that you just talked about. The Hearts and Minds campaign, and addressing, talking to the schools and the teachers and the administrators and the parents to reframe and make that an interesting option. And that really is it's coming at it from another angle, whereas a few bullet points ago when we were talking about the Great Resignation, and hey, you're a business leader and you've got a shortage of people by 10% potentially. The burden's not just 100% on the business to try and convince everyone that you're good enough to come work for.
Right.
You're really triangulating and making it a different culture in the state of why manufacturing is a good path.
Yeah, and look, the state has spent a lot of money building out the talent training infrastructure the last 10 years. So we've made, to use a manufacturing analogy, we've made the CapEx, right? And now we need to drive volume to that CapEx. So I think this advertising campaign is a very cost-effective use of state resources because, we need to drive more candidates into these programs, get them that training, and then get them out. We need 6,000 to 8,000 new entrants annually in our manufacturing workforce for the foreseeable future. And right now, we're training about half that number. So we've got the capability to train more. We need to drive that demand. And then ultimately, longer term, again, we want to change perception. I mean, you know this. Most people who listen to this know this. It's not dark, dirty, dangerous anymore in manufacturing. It's clean, lean, and green. But we need to make sure that other people know that. And one of the great things about manufacturing is it provides opportunities for all of our young people, regardless of your educational background, whether it's, whether you're, high school graduate, all the way up to PhDs, right? I mean, the manufacturers hire everything. And so there's a lot of talent in and around the state that we need to access with these programs, get them trained, and get them into manufacturing.
Well said. So as a way to, we talked about a lot of things that are in people's minds right now. What's ahead? What's coming? What are the trends that people need to be aware of after they get through today's current challenges and start thinking of their future?
Yeah, well, I think for manufacturing in Connecticut, I think we touched on a lot of these, right? I mean, one of the things is I really expect as we go into 2022, you're going to see business leaders get more engaged in proactive recruiting and retaining of talent. They have to. And I'm hopeful that we're going to take that and target at some communities that historically we haven't targeted. It's in our own enlightened self-interest. There's I always say, talent isn't limited by zip code, but opportunities frequently are. So we need to find those underserved communities, find talent, people with mechanical and mathematical aptitude in there, get them access to training and getting them into our workforces. The state's got a role to play in that, and business leaders have a role to play in that. And I think you're going to see business leaders get more and more engaged in that as we go into next year. We talked about we're going to see the continuing shortening of supply chains. Again, this is an evolution, not a revolution. You can't, it took us 25 years to get to where we are. We're not going to turn on a dime, but we'll continue to see that. I think that's a long-term trend. We are going to see, again, increased levels of communication, cooperation, collaboration, and coordination in the Connecticut manufacturing ecosystem. We now have this Office of Workforce Strategy. They're trying to coordinate the activities in what I call the talent training infrastructure. And then we've got a lot of work going on in our manufacturing associations to coordinate and collaborate. And we have the advent of these regional sector partnerships that are coming to life. And they're really trying to coordinate the manufacturers in their region. And then they're looking to coordinate across the region. And then ultimately, things that are statewide issues get elevated to the state level to get addressed. We're going to see the acceleration of the adoption of digital technologies in manufacturing. I mean, we're still in the early stages where most companies don't know what they don't know. And there's a lot we're doing, a lot of different entities are doing to make sure that companies are aware of what's out there and then help them understand how specific technologies would be very beneficial for their business. And I think this is the type of thing that once you reach a critical mass, it starts to be a self-perpetuating motion machine, but we're not there yet. And we'll see, and sort of under the digital technology purview, we'll see increased focus on cybersecurity. Manufacturing, unfortunately, is a target-rich environment for cybercrime, because there are so many manufacturers, and we've got 4,000 in Connecticut alone, but also manufacturers, cyber events are particularly painful for manufacturing businesses, which cyber criminals know, which is why they tend to target manufacturers for sort of ransomware events and the like. So, and then also our defense manufacturers need to reach a certain level of cyber maturity to continue to do work with the U.S. government, which is driving this requirement. So, it's a requirement for our defense manufacturers, but it's just good business for the rest of our manufacturers, and frankly, for all of our businesses. And then clean energy. I think people aren't aware. There are going to be requirements flowed down by the end customers, by the OEMs, by the primes, whatever, are going to start flowing down to their supply bases, requirements for sustainability or to get to net zero in carbon emissions. And that's something that I think people are going to become more aware of as they start to see these flow down requirements coming from their customers. The flip side of that is there's a tremendous opportunity for our manufacturers in clean energy. There's going to be $100 billion with a B, $100 billion worth of CapEx being invested mostly off the shores of southern New England, off east of Long Island and south of Martha's Vineyard, which happens to be one of the prime spots in the world for offshore wind generation. And so there's going to be a tremendous amount of activity in building out these offshore wind farms over the next 10 years. And then continuing on after that, these installations are in service for 20, 25 years. In aggregate, there's going to be somewhere between $3 and $5 billion worth of annual support that's needed for those. So there's a huge economic opportunity coming in with that. And then there's just a whole bunch of stuff going on with EVs. We have two of the top EV charging station companies in the country here in Connecticut. There's stuff going on in batteries. And so there's a lot of market opportunity, fuel cells in and around clean energy. So again, we're going to see it as manufacturers start becoming aware of there are going to be requirements that are placed on them by their customers, but there are also going to be significant market opportunities for people who are aware of this and in a position to pivot and take advantage of it.
That's quite a list. And you're right that we did talk about some of these things, but at the same time, you introduced things like digital tech, cybersecurity, and then certainly the clean energy side. And it's nice to know that once you as a manufacturer get your cash flow back, you get your orders back, that you can start to focus on what's next, and you just basically gave them the playbook. Here's some things to think about.
Yeah, again, what's great is people now focus on how do I capitalize on the opportunity rather than how do I mean, not everybody's out of the woods, but most companies I speak to, they have the orders back. Now they just need the people and in some cases the capital to execute on those orders. And that's those are challenges, but they're certainly better challenges than we had, a year plus ago, where we're trying to figure out, how do you split your shifts and keep people 6 feet away and all of that. So these are challenges, but these are the challenges you want to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much. Well, Colin, this has really been the density of knowledge and insights that you've provided in this short time that we've had together has been outstanding. And I think, for the audience here, and again, not just for the manufacturers, it was certainly slanted the conversation today, but I know anyone who is a business leader will recognize from this conversation today a lot of things that you can be doing in your business, and it'll help you to get unstuck if you're stuck, and move forward into the next year and multiple years to strengthen your position, your economic position, and keep you strong.
Yeah, and I would say, I'm always available. That you track me down. It's just my name, colin.cooper@ct.gov, and I'll apologize ahead of time. We've got 4,000 manufacturers and one of me, but I do try to get back to people. So if it takes me a little while, I apologize in advance.
Well, you have been approachable and reachable, and I'm really grateful that you joined us here today. And this will give our audience an opportunity to know a little bit more about you, and you may get your phone ringing.
Okay, well, it does anyway. So
yeah, that's right.
That's great. Well, Pete, thanks so much for the opportunity. I really enjoy the opportunity to talk about Connecticut manufacturing. And when I'm talking to a practitioner who knows what they're talking about, it's even that much more enjoyable. So thank you.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, I enjoyed this. Well, as a wrap up, everyone listening, Business Results Radio, and hope you come back for more excellent episodes like this one. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Business Results Radio. Remember to share this episode on social media or directly with people you think would benefit from it. And if you are willing, subscribe to this podcast and give us a 5-star rating. Go ahead and do that now while you're thinking of it. I also want to invite you to visit businessresultsradio.com